Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be talking about Multiversus and why I think the reason the player base dropped so significantly was in large part due to the lack of stages. Multiversus certainly had an interesting history for the duration of its existence. At one point, it was the single most concurrently played fighting game of all time. This is due, I think, to three primary reasons. First, it's a high-budget platform fighter filled with recognizable characters from varying comics and cartoons. Two, the game is free, so the minimum investment you need to pick up the game and play is hard drive space. And three, the game is actually genuinely fun. But while these three things can take you very far, they can't keep you that far. Inevitably, some people are just gonna get tired of the game and stop playing. Some people are going to try the game out and decide it's not for them. Due to the game being a live service game, inevitably some people are going to tire of extended periods of times with no updates and decide to dip. I don't think people are wrong when they cite the lack of new characters since the release of Marvin the Martian as a reason the game died. After all, there was a period of time where there was no new characters after the release of Marvin for more days than existed the game in open beta prior to Marvin's release. However, having new characters for the sake of having new characters isn't the solution either. After all, some characters might be bad picks, like Black Adam. However, one thing that I think is often ignored in discussions about the game's longevity is the lack of stages and how that affects casual gamers. Multiversus, being a fighting game, is going to appeal to two primary demographics. One being sweaty tryhards who want to be the best of the best of the best, and the other being casual gamers wanting to have a little bit of a challenge, but nothing that would impede their fun. For most of the game's release, there were very few stages to be on. There was Trophy's Edge, Finn's Tree Fort, Scooby's Mansion, and Sky Arena. Later on, a Space Jam themed stage, The Court, was added, but that never appeared in 2v2 or 1v1 rotation, which is something I'll talk about later. And then there was the Game of Thrones stage. Yes, there are variations with some of these stages, often being in the form of having additional platforms, or roof versus no roof, or different areas where you could fall to the bottom of the map. However, this means less for casual gamers. They don't care if they're playing on Sky Arena platforms versus no platforms. They just realize they're playing on Sky Arena again. Now, to the devs' credit, they have actually tried to solve this a little bit in some of the updates of the game. For example, there's the completely standard normal Finn's Tree Fort that players have become very familiar with over the course of the game's lifetime. But now one of the variations takes place at night, and in my personal opinion, this is the best looking stage in the game. And while it does seem small, and maybe it is, there is a very different feeling for casual gamers going from saying, oh, we're playing in Finn's Tree Fort again, to, oh, we're playing in Finn's Tree Fort, but it's a nighttime version. Like I talked about in my video comparing Journey to Scorn, you could get a lot of mileage just from an area looking a little bit different. Similarly, there's the standard Scooby's Haunted Mansion with a roof with a heavy green and blue color scheme. And there's a Scooby's Haunted Mansion no roof, which looks like a dilapidated version of the previous stage and has a very significant purple and blue color scheme. The no roof version actually was initially distinct from the roofed version. They just made that distinction more evident, and I think it paid off. Now, naturally, they can't just re-release the same stage over and over and over again and change the background color palette. There's also issues such as the music all being the same, most scores being orchestral, which, again, to the developer's credit, late into the game's life, they did seem to try to address that. For example, releasing a more synth-pop version of the Steven Universe stage music. But beyond all of that, there's just the simple issue of diminishing returns. You can't really play the same stage over and over again and it be fresh and interesting. At some point, it will just be Finn's Tree Fort or Batcave or Sky Arena again. Another thing is the perplexing question of which characters even get a stage. Steven Universe and Adventure Time have 2 reps, so it makes sense that there'd be at least 1 stage for those 2 shows. But by the end of the game's lifetime, Looney Tunes had 3 reps. And this isn't some rinky-dink little IP, it's Looney Tunes. It's still Warner Brothers' flagship franchise, and they don't get a stage at all. By the way, LeBron James is considered to be a Space Jam rep, not necessarily a Looney Tunes rep, so no, the court doesn't count. Arya Stark is the game's one and only Game of Thrones rep, and she gets a stage. Naturally, this is more of a consequence of the game still being fairly early in production, with a lot of other, I would argue, far more important things being worked on throughout the game's lifetime, so it is more of a quibble than anything, and hopefully for the game's full launch, we see a lot more stage representation for the characters that are already in. Whether it's Superman's Fortress of Solitude, or the Martian Palace, or Bugs Bunny's Hole, or Iron Giant's Scrapyard, or I haven't seen Gremlins, so whatever location or thing they can come up with that, hopefully we will just see more stages in general. So one could summarize my entire first point here as being quantity. There's simply not enough stages, and arguably that's the easiest thing for them to address in this. My next point is quality, and that might be more difficult to make work. The stages that exist in Multiverses are great if you're a competitive player. They're all symmetrical, they make sense, they have a central platform. Apparently no one wants to be on the same stage as Marvin here. There's no randomness, there's almost no stage hazards or moving parts. It's all very basic that allows you to focus more on your character than having to worry about anything else. Again, great for competitive, and I do enjoy watching competitive players, but for a casual player base, that can get kind of boring after a while. I know it might be the most cliché thing in the world to compare an up-and-coming platform fighter to the King Daddy platform fighter itself, the Super Smash Bros. Franchise, but there are some examples of stages in that game that I think would illustrate my point extremely well. The Temple is one of the most iconic stages in all of Smash Bros. It is a large, asymmetrical stage that has different areas that posit different levels of danger and challenge. If you're a connoisseur of Weenie Hut Jr., you'd hang out in Area 1. If you wanted a little bit of a fight, you'd go to Area 2. If you're trying to punish someone, you'd go to Area 3. If you want to see where boys become men, you go to Area 4. And if you absolutely want to make sure someone racks up a ridiculous amount of damage, Area 5. If you're getting punished too harshly on the top levels, you can always go from Area 2 to Area 4 or Area 1 to Area 3. And hell, some characters can go in the reverse. Such a stage, due to its asymmetry and different areas being more punishing than others, goes against the cornerstone of the competitive scene, that all things are equal, it's all about the player and his skill. There should not be any unfair advantages or disadvantages based on where someone may spawn and how punishing an area can be. But from a casual perspective, it's really fucking fun. It's fun being a shithead in Area 5. It's fun playing those high-stakes battles in Area 4. It's fun juggling people around in Area 2. It's fun going for those high-stakes drops from Area 2 to Area 4 or Area 1 to Area 3, and it's fun seeing if your character can go up the opposite direction. Another extremely memorable stage is Green Greens. This stage is centered almost exclusively around 1 and 2, these destructible blocks. These blocks can be destroyed with a simple attack, and if you destroy enough of them, you make another pit to try to force other players into. However, some of these blocks are bomb blocks, that when you attack them, they blow up, damaging you, other blocks, and potentially other players, leading to plays like I have 11% damage, he has 150, I'm going to break the bomb block, damage us both, and ring him out. Periodically, new blocks will fall from the sky and thus regenerate these structures. The way they fall, whether they're normal blocks or bomb blocks, is seemingly random or effectively random to the players. But that's not all, cause in the center of the stage is good old Wispy Woods himself, who would periodically blow the players to the left or the right, thus somewhat forcing the game to one direction or another. Randomness is an important term here because it's one of those phrases that makes competitive players run away screaming. After all, it's one of those things that can put them at a disadvantage or their opponent at an advantage regardless of skill level. But for casual players, it's rather welcome because it allows for memorable, goofy moments. I remember back in high school playing Smash Brothers Brawl with my friends, and the Kirby Warp Star that takes a character off screen and then slams into the ground appeared randomly. My friend grabbed it, tried to aim for me and missed, and then randomly another Warp Star appeared. I grabbed it, flew in the air, aimed for him, hit him, knocked him off the stage into the blast zone. Everyone in the room was popping off because that was such a major amusing moment. And it's a memorable one. After all these years, I still remember such a goofy fucking moment. It was a time when the stars aligned and produced something that's worth keeping in your brain space for all these years. And the entire thing was completely random. If the game decided to spawn a different item, that moment would never have happened. The third casual Smash stage I'd like to go into is Norfair. This one's pretty simple. You fight on some platforms above some lava that obviously will damage you if you touch it. But occasionally a little safe house will appear, and when it does, that means a massive tidal wave of lava is coming that will engulf the entire screen, damaging whoever is outside of the safe house. This means everything centers around the safe house for a short period of time, with players trying to get in it, stay in it, and keep enemy players outside. But even if they are inside of it, they're not out of the woods yet, because potentially an enemy player could also be inside of it when it finally seals itself off from the rest of the map, and therefore you're engaged in close quarters combat pummeling against your opponent. For competitive players, they might find Norfair to be no fair, but for casual players, they might find the quick adrenaline rush of trying to stay in the safe house and keep everyone else out to be something fun. And that's kind of the major gist of it all. Multiversus needs more casual stages, one that appeals to people looking to have fun, even if competitive players would ban those stages from their potential stage pool. Players like Gofo or NCAT or Chavo are the minority of the player base in Multiversus, and I don't think they should alienate the casual player base who wants a little bit more goofiness, levity, and randomness in favor of the competitive scene. So have stages with slippery surfaces. Have stages that move to the right. Have stages that move upward. Have stages that move all around. Have stages where very rarely you shouldn't be on the ground level. Have stages where just sometimes you shouldn't be on the ground level. Have stages where you should never be on the lowest most ground level. Have stages that rotate. Have stages where things rush across them and damage players. Have stages that are the most comfy combination of aesthetic and music you've ever seen. Just go wild. Get out of that competitive comfort zone. In a game where Bugs Bunny and Batman can fight Gizmo and LeBron James, don't take yourself so seriously. Especially since theoretically you might have a stage that's casual, goofy, asymmetrical, and whatever, but not so much to the point that competitive players do ban it from their stage pool. But if every stage is strict, symmetrical, no-nonsense gameplay all of the time, then yeah, that's going to get old after a while for casual players. Now, obviously they don't have to do all of the gimmicks that I've suggested earlier. After all, it may very well be that some of them are impossible to do or make work with all the moving parts, that is, the unique movesets of all these different characters. But the point is, I think they need to expand their horizons in what kind of stages and how it feels to play on those stages and what could happen on those stages. Now, when I was recalling a memorable moment from Smash Bros. Brawl, some people might have been aware enough to say or think, hey, wait a minute. Warp stars aren't stages, they're items. And while the layout of the stage itself does impact how those items can be used, you are correct, keen observer watching this video. And even though items are in fact not stages, I would like to talk about items in this video because I think that the issue is so closely intertwined that it is worth discussing. When Multiversus started, there were 4 different game modes you can play. 1v1, which is one player versus another. Teams, or 2v2, which is a team of 2 versus another team of 2. Silly mode, which is 2v2, but there's different additional effects or gameplay elements added on top of it. And free-for-all, which is 4 players, no teams. Also, when the game first launched, there was no distinction between casual and competitive play. So they had to choose which game mode would be more casual focused and which game mode would be more competitive focused. So they allowed items in silly mode and free-for-all, but 1v1 and 2v2 were completely item-free. However, later on they did eventually make a ranked mode, a place for the try-hard Ultra Sweats to try to battle it out and see who's the absolute champion. And this is super serious, because some characters are banned from ranked mode if there's certain exploitive glitches and bugs that need to be sorted out. Some stages like Throne Room are changed for ranked mode to be more competitive friendly, and some stages, assuming they do make more wacky, interesting stages, would be banned outright from ranked mode. So that now that the competitive scene have their little area where it can be no items, Fox only, final destination, did they change anything about the casual area? Unfortunately, no. 1v1 and 2v2 still don't have any items. Given that the game is focused so heavily around team play, 2v2 is naturally going to be the main area where most players flock to, and given that it's still incredibly competitive in terms of how it plays, the casual player base is naturally going to find it less and less appealing to play 2v2s. Now you might be saying, what about silly mode? And at the risk of coming off as a hypocrite, I will point out that silly mode does change certain elements of gameplay. It either adds new mechanics or affects the way your character plays. I'll say this, sometimes you might want the stage to be a little bit silly and interesting, but want everything else to play as straight as possible, but also to have items. I know that sounds a bit contradictive, but let's look at Smash Brothers again. Smash Brothers normally is like free-for-all 1v1 and 2v2, where there's players fighting each other on all these wacky stages, and occasionally items are thrown into the mix. However, in Smash Brothers, it's possible to set up the game in such a way that there's inherent gameplay changing elements, like having all of the characters on screen have the metal power-up that makes them slower, fall faster, but punch harder, or to give all the characters bunny ears that make them faster, lighter, and able to jump higher. 2v2 and silly mode is a difference between I would like to play a match with every character permanently having the metal power-up, and I would rather every character not have the metal power-up. So yeah, having items in more of the game modes would improve the replayability and the fun factor for casual gamers. Multiversus has shown itself to be an immensely enjoyable game so far, but could be just that much better. It hasn't even been 2 full months since a game was taken offline, and I'm already getting withdrawals. So I really hope that whenever it relaunches next year in a fuller, proper state, the developers are really able to knock it out of the park. And while new characters are obviously important, I hope I have demonstrated why having a variety of stages and access to items are also just as important. Just for shits and giggles, how's about I end the video on the ultimate nitpick quibble? If you have the Commander X2 skin equipped, Marvin's flag should be the one from the show. Just imagine how many new players that would bring to the game. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, that I gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.